This entire meal will last on my shelf for years, and all I have to do to bring it back to life is just add water. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a brand new meal in a jar recipe for you. Meals in a jar are great for emergencies and power outages because they're shelf stable for years and they only require adding water and a brief cooking time to have a delicious, comforting meal ready to eat. Even better, they can serve double duty as a fast meal on a busy night to keep you out of the drive-thru. One thing I love about meals in a jar is you can adapt your family's favorite meals to be meals in a jar. The recipe I'm making today was my very first signature dish way back when. It came from this cookbook, Down Home Cooking the New Healthier Way. My first year of college, my first time really on my own, my Grammy sent me this cookbook and I loved it. I read through it every night, dog-earing the pages and marking the recipes that I wanted to try. I loved this book. This was the first cookbook I owned, but it was not the first cookbook I loved. The first cookbook that stole my heart was this one, my mother's old 1970s edition Betty Crocker cookbook. This one's a reprint. I mean, look at these pictures. What kid wouldn't love this book? Let me know down in the comments what your favorite cookbooks are or were. I don't know how many people even use cookbooks anymore. My favorite meal in the whole book that my grandmother gave me is this Dixieland Shortcake. I used to make this for everyone back in the day. I still love it. It's kind of a mashup dish, which I love in foods. It takes a shortcake, which is typically a dessert dish, and turns it into a dinner dish by using chicken and veggies and cornbread. And it's delicious. Let's get started and turn this down-home comfort meal into a just add water meal in a jar. You don't need any special equipment for these. You don't need a pressure canner. We're not pressure canning them. You're just going to need a wide mouth quart-size mason jar. We are going to use a canning funnel that just helps us get everything in the jar more easily. Of course, your ingredients and your measuring utensils. And that's really all there is to it. If you want these to sit on your shelf longer than a year or so, you're going to want to use an oxygen absorber in the jar with the ingredients, and that'll seal it up really well to last for several years. If you watched many of my meal in a jar videos, you know I usually leave powdered ingredients and smaller ingredients until later on in the jar so that they can filter down with the bulkier ingredients and give us more room in the jar. But this jar, we're going to have plenty of room, so I am going to start with my powdered ingredients. So I've got 1/8 of a cup of flour. This is the same as 2 tablespoons of flour, just all-purpose flour. And then I've got just a couple other seasonings here. So this is 2 teaspoons of chicken bouillon and 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. This is such a simple recipe. There's not a lot of fancy, hard to find ingredients. It's really, really simple and basic. So there's our powders. And next, I'm going to add my bell peppers. So I've got some diced red bell peppers. And I'm adding 1 cup of the peppers. If you happen to have sliced red bell peppers, you could break them up into smaller pieces and make dices. I've done that before if all I have is sliced. But I will put a link down below to where I get my diced red bell peppers. Of course, if you freeze dry them yourself, you can do them in any shape or size you want. And next I'm going to add my chicken. So I am doing freeze-dried pulled chicken. Now the freeze-dried meats and vegetables in these jar meals, if you're not familiar, is what gives it its really long shelf life and it's a really good quality. It seems like a fresh meal. This is freeze-dried and not dehydrated ingredients. Now you can see this is good pulled chicken, like rotisserie chicken. If you have bigger pieces, you can always break them up into a little bit smaller. You know, any shape or size will work. I just usually used to cook the chicken breasts and shred them, and so that's what I like in this dish. This is a lot easier to use the already shredded, already cooked chicken breast. There is a cup. You can do a cup or a cup and a half. I'm going to put a cup and a half in here, or closer to a cup and a half. But if you want to keep the cost of the meal down, you can always do less meat because the meat is always going to be the costliest portion of any meal. So if you want to make the meal a little less costly to prepare, you can always cut down the meat portion. The next ingredient I'm adding is some freeze-dried sliced mushrooms. I'm doing 3/4 of a cup of the mushrooms. So here I've got 1/2 of a cup and another 1/4 cup. So that's 3/4 of a cup. And next I'm going to be adding green onions. This freeze-dried green onions, this is my final ingredient. 1/3 of a cup of the freeze-dried green onions. That's going to give us that great onion flavor and also some color to this as well. So that's all there is to it for this jar. This is all the ingredients that we need. At this point, I would add my oxygen absorber and put on the lid. And then, of course, label this and get it on the shelf with the recipe. Now, this is the chicken and gravy portion of the meal. And then there is one more portion that goes with this, and that's the cornbread that this is going to go on top of. So let's get started on the cornbread jar. Once again, we're just going to need a jar and a funnel to get started. First ingredients that I'm adding for the cornbread is going to be flour. So this is just all-purpose flour. I've got 1 cup here and then another 1/4 cup. So this is 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And next I'm going to add my salt. I've got a few ingredients here that I am going to be separating. So I'm adding them in between other ingredients just because I believe there's a chance they could interact with one another if they're touching. So just to be safe, I like to keep them separate in jars like this. So this is a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Next, I'm going to add my cornmeal. I've got a 1/2 cup and another 1/4 cup. So that's 3/4 cup of cornmeal. Next, I'm going to add my baking powder. This is another one of those ingredients that I just like to keep separate, the salt, baking powder, and baking soda, just in case. I'm going to be adding 2 teaspoons of the baking powder. I like to pass these types of ingredients through a wire mesh strainer like this just to make sure that there's no clumps, because I think that's kind of unpleasant when you come up with a clump in your baked good, a clump of baking powder, especially baking soda. So I just pass it through a wire mesh strainer like that. Next, I'm adding a 1/2 cup of sugar. Now, this is the one place that I did sort of depart from the original recipe. I added extra sugar. I like my cornbread kind of sweet. So if you don't like sweet cornbread, this might not be the recipe for you, or you might want to just cut the sugar down a little bit. But it's not super, super sweet, but it's a little sweet, and that's how I like my cornbread. And now I'm adding my baking soda. So this is the final ingredient that I like to keep separate from some of the others. I just like to have the baking soda and the baking powder separate from the salt. Once again, I like to pass this through the wire mesh. Next, I'm going to be using some scrambled egg powder, 1/8 cup, which you might remember is the same as 2 tablespoons. If you don't have 1/8 cup measure, then just use 2 tablespoons. But I tell you, they're super handy to have. So I'll link to these that I purchased down below in case you want to grab some, because not every set comes with 1/8 cup, but I use those a ton. I would rather just scoop once, scoop and dump, than have to do it twice with 2 tablespoons. The next thing I'm going to add is going to be some buttermilk powder. Now, sometimes my buttermilk powder gets clumpy, and in that case, I would also pass this through that wire mesh strainer. This is looking pretty good, so I'm not going to bother, but you can do that with any powdered ingredient that gets clumpy. And then my final ingredient for the cornbread is going to be some butter powder. I'm using a 1/4 cup of the butter powder. And I am going to pass this one through here. Now, if this was just going into like a heated liquidy dish, it would absolutely melt up any clumps. But because this is going to be mixed up just as a powdered mix, I just think it's best to get out any lumps before I get it, which actually there really aren't many lumps, but I'll just do this anyways. All right, there is our cornbread mix ready to go on the shelf. Now, I would recommend vacuum sealing a mix like this just because there is sugar in here. So you would want to put like a cupcake liner or something over the top of the jar, over the powders, so that they don't get sucked up into your seal and into your vacuum sealer. But since I'm going to be fixing this up tonight to show you how it comes out, I'm just going to go ahead and put a lid on it and not worry about the vacuum seal or anything like that. So this is what our cornbread mix looks like when it's all done. So here are our 2 jars all ready to go on the shelf. I've got them labeled and they're all ready to go. Make sure that you have the cooking instructions with the water amounts printed out and saved somewhere, because you don't want to have to be relying on the internet to get those in case the power's out when you need to make these. All right, now let's prepare the meal. I am going to use my emergency butane stove just to sort of show how I would do this in an emergency. This is what I would typically use to cook indoors when the power's out. I am going to do the cornbread outside in my propane oven, but I do have an indoor oven, an Ember oven that runs off of sterno fuel. So if I couldn't cook outside for some reason, that would be an option for me. Before I do anything else, I'm going to mix up the cornbread and get this baking so this can be all ready for the chicken filling, because the chicken filling doesn't take very long at all. This is enough cornbread for an 8-inch square pan. So I've got my 8-inch square Pyrex just with a little bit of nonstick spray in there. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this up in my batter bowl. So I'm just going to dump all my mix into the bowl. And now I'm just going to take a whisk and just whisk these ingredients together to get them blended and break up any clumps that might have formed while the jar was sitting on the shelf. The other thing you can do is you could put this mix together in a bowl like this, blend it up like this, and then put it into the jar. All right, so now that that's pretty well blended, I'm going to add my water. Now I'm adding 1.25 cups of water to this cold water. There's 1.25 cups. Now I'm just going to go ahead and blend this together. Now the water amount is really pretty much the most important thing when you're doing a baking mix like this. You want this to be a typical cornbread batter consistency. Most of us have mixed up cornbread before from a mix or from a scratch recipe. So the water amounts with a quick bread like this can make or break your recipe, because if you get, if you're adding more and more water, it can tend to make it more and more tender until the breaking point. You get to this point that it's too much water and then it just doesn't come out. It's flat and it just doesn't rise properly and it has a gummy texture. So you can be somewhat flexible with the water amount, but you can't be too flexible. So just look for a good batter consistency. So this is about the consistency we want with a cornbread batter like this, because it can vary depending on how you measure your ingredients. Even different people's measuring utensils can be slightly off. Things like the humidity where you live and where you are cooking, things like your elevation, your altitude, that kind of stuff actually can all affect the water amounts that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and pour my batter right into my pan. All right, I've got this batter ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get this into my camp oven. All right, I'm going to get this into the oven. It's not quite at 350 yet, but it will be. I'm going to bake this at 350 for about 25 to 30 minutes, or until it's done and golden brown. This will keep rising and then we'll have to adjust it. Emergency ovens can be a little bit hard to regulate sometimes. Sometimes you can't get it as hot as you need it. Sometimes you can't get it to cool off. I could crack this door, but it should be fine to bake this cornbread at, it's baking closer to 400 right now, but it'll just bake a little faster, I think. It might brown a little bit more. It'll be fine. I love this outdoor oven. It runs on propane and it has burners up here too. So this could actually be an all-in-one stove and oven for emergencies. It has to be used outside, or it should be used outside. Of course, you could put it in a covered area if you needed to use it during bad weather. And I think she's done. So I am going to start by opening up the jar for the chicken mixture and just emptying this right into my saucepan. I'm going to be using 2 cups of water. I am going to put the water into this jar first, because you can see there's a little bit of flour and seasoning and stuff left in the jar. So we want to make sure that that's going to get all rinsed out and into our dish. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add my 2 cups of water into the pan. I am going to go ahead and mix this, going to get the flour blended in and all the ingredients moistened. And then I'm going to let it set for about 5 or 10 minutes, just so that mostly the chicken can start absorbing the water, because we want to make sure that everything's going to get done at the same time, get tender at the same time. The chicken is fully cooked. It does not have to cook. It just has to get tender all the way through. And it's not going to take very long for everything else. So I just want to make sure. Oh, this smells so good. It smells just like when I make it fresh. All right, so I'm going to let this set with a lid on for just 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, it's been sitting for 5 minutes. I'm going to give this one more stir and just put the heat on. And this is really just going to have to come up to a simmer, and then just simmer just long enough to get the chicken tender and the sauce thickened, the gravy thickened. I am going to use a lid just to make sure we don't lose a ton of liquid to evaporation, because we need all that liquid in there. All right, now this is only simmered for like a couple of minutes, but it's already thickened. I am going to turn the heat off, because if anything, we are just going to need our chicken to, and actually some of this chicken is looking very tender. I just need to find a bigger piece and make sure that it's gotten tender all the way through. And if not, we'll let it sit a little bit longer in the sauce, and that will get it all the way. I am going to let this set about 5 more minutes off the heat, just with this lid on, to make sure that all that meat is tender all the way through. All right, I think this is ready to serve. We get a little slice of cornbread. You can either put the top on like that, or you can just serve it open-faced and even add more chicken mixture over here. But this is a really good serving size right here. So let's get a little bit of everything on the fork and give it a try. This is so good. This is one of my favorite dishes, and this tastes just as good as making it fresh. Over the years, I occasionally have somebody say that they don't want the chicken mixture on the cornbread, so they'll eat them separately, side by side. You can do variations of this and serve the chicken on biscuits. I'll have a biscuit in a jar video coming up really soon. You can also serve this over rice or noodles, so that's an option too, especially if you don't have a way to bake cornbread in an emergency. Crackers would also be good, and they'd need no cooking at all. Another no-cook option that's going to taste even better is these freeze-dried biscuits. These are already baked, delicious biscuits that have been freeze-dried to be shelf-stable for many years until you decide to add a little bit of moisture back. And then you're going to have delicious biscuits ready for your meal. Now let's talk about freeze-dried food in these pouches for a minute, because we get a lot of questions about this. A lot of people are used to seeing freeze-dried food sold in cans, and that's what I was used to. But I've been getting lots more food in these bags. In fact, the pulled chicken and the diced red peppers that I used today both came in bags like these, and they are amazing. One of the biggest complaints we heard and had about buying food in cans was dented cans. So the first thing I realized about these bags is no more dented cans. It's not going to happen. Another thing I noticed is how tightly the food is packed into these bags and how these bags are sealed down around the food. In cans, there is always airspace with the food in the cans. So as they're being shipped, the food is getting tossed about in the cans. It's slamming into the rigid sides of the cans because of that airspace. And so the food hits the side of the cans and it gets a lot of breakage in the food, which is why you open up the cans and you find so much powder in them because of the food's breaking down. Of course, the powder is usable too for lots of things. So it's not going to go to waste, but you are getting less of the usable, broccoli florets or strawberry slices or whatever the food is that you ordered. From what I've seen, this is not happening in these bags because nothing is moving inside these bags. And they come packed so well inside the boxes when they arrive. They are laid in like bricks. They have always been wrapped and padded very well. So we have seen no damage in shipping like we always did with cans. Another benefit I didn't realize until I started getting these bags, if you've been here a while, you know I dislike round things for storage because of the wasted space with things that don't have corners. We have our cans stored in racks or boxes, and we always lament all that wasted space. With these bags, we can lay them in our storage containers just like they come in the box they're shipped in, and we have very little to no empty space, which is a very good thing when you're trying to store a lot of food in a small space. One thing I used to be wary about was the windows, the clear windows on the bags, but I educated myself and I found out that these windows are part of the bag. There's no interruption in the material. There's no seam. They don't change the structure of the bag at all in terms of keeping out oxygen and moisture, and they also don't affect the integrity of the bags over time. I am going to be careful and protect these clear openings from light when we're storing them, but the way that we're storing them, that's a non-issue. One more thing I've discovered about these bags is that they hold a lot more than I thought they did. For the most part, these are packed really, really full, and I have been surprised and impressed with how much is actually in these bags. I usually use these canisters for my number 10 cans of freeze-dried foods. They usually hold a number 10 can just about perfectly. And these bags fill them over half full. So these bags actually contain more than half of what's in a number 10 gallon size can for the most part. I was super impressed with that as well. And one more thing I just thought of as I was making this meal, some people like to make my jar meals in Mylar bags for one reason or another. Maybe they like to take them camping or they live in earthquake country, so they just don't want to use the glass jars. I was looking at these bags that I took my chicken and my red bell peppers out of, and I realized I could actually reuse these bags and use them to hold one of my meals. They do have a zipper top, so as long as I'm careful about how I open them, I could reseal them above the zipper, or I could just disregard the zipper and keep on sealing them down further and further and just reuse these bags over and over. So that was a big bonus for me. We've been working closely with this company for a while, and they are amazing to work with. They're awesome, and they have actually given us an exclusive coupon code just for our viewers that you can use on any order. not just your first order, any order that you make. So write down Wicked Prepared and use that code anytime you make a purchase. Just go to tryfreezedried.com to make your purchase and be sure to use that Wicked Prepared code at checkout for your discount. Actually, if you're watching this video right after it comes out, either Sunday or Monday, I have another special code and link that can help you save actually 50% off of your order. So head to tryfreezedried.com for the best offers currently available. It never ceases to amaze me that these simple jars full of dry ingredients can create such amazing meals and how close they are to the original dish. One great thing about these is that you can change them up any way you want. You can adjust the seasonings and the salt to your tastes and preferences. Add more veggies, less veggies, more chicken, whatever floats your boat. I encourage everyone to make a new recipe once, make it all the way through, taste it, test it, make sure your family likes it. Make any adjustments that you need to make it just right for you. Then, once you're sure it's a winner for your family, make up a bunch. Make 6 or 10 or even a dozen jars. If you do this with a selection of your family's favorite recipes, then you'll have a pantry full of comfort and full of variety. And you'll be ready for anything that comes your way, which is a great feeling. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a blue heart emoji down in the comments, and I will put a video right up here with another recipe that I think you'll love. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.